Hi, I'm M.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome.
Welcome back to Tropetober! I have to do that at least once every episode now.
But only for October, right?
No, every episode.
Oh, okay, it's our new thing. Got it. Okay.
So, we're talking about something a little bit furry and fun today.
And, it unfortunately is not chinchillas.
Aww.
I know that you are all hoping for that. That's really what you were here for, but it is not going to be chinchillas. Probably. I guess it could be.
They're so soft.
Yeah, and they're really cute. And you know what? The baby version is even cuter.
How
Like,
is
you
that even
didn't
possible?
you didn't think it was possible. You're like, this thing is so cute as an adult. It had to be like some kind of weird, freaky, hairless baby, right? You would be wrong. It's exactly like an adult, but smaller.
I'm kind of crying right now. I'm thinking about a baby chinchilla.
They're the best. But we're probably not talking about that.
No, I don't think we are talking about baby chinchillas unless you have something up your sleeve that I don't know about.
No, but I don't want to take it completely off the table because now I really, really want a fic that includes baby chinchillas in whatever fashion that they may appear, including ones that might relate to what we are talking about, which is shapeshifters, specifically of the animal variety.
Are there many shapeshifters that don't turn into animals in fic?
I think that there is a subgroup of shapeshifters that are more all-encompassing, like they could change into anything theoretically, or they're a type of monster that shifts between people. But I'm not really talking about those. I'm talking about specifically people who can turn into animals. Just to clarify, I'm not necessarily talking about the trope where somebody is turned into an animal kind of against their will, and I'm not necessarily talking about Hollywood werewolves of the Teen Wolf or the original Wolfman movie variety, where they're sort of a half-man, half-wolf, upright, bipedal, furry thing.
You can't forget about the original Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox.
Yeah, that's still not quite it.
Where he plays basketball and he becomes the most popular person in school because he can turn into a werewolf and is really good at basketball. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. It's hilarious. And it's so 80s. Okay, anyway. Teen Wolf diatribe crossed off the list.
It had to be done. What I'm talking about specifically is people, whether they be shifters or werewolves or other were creatures, that voluntarily turn all the way into an animal. I know it's sort of an arbitrary division because there isn't really this division within the separate tropes that I'm talking about, but there's a reason for this. I should point out that I'm gonna include animagi in this because it's a specific fandom, but honestly it's just a person who can turn into an animal. But the reason that I'm talking about this as opposed to all the other tropes, specifically the ones where people turn into kind of a half human, half animal, I find it that the discourse around that tends to be more about within the story. They're talking about things like what makes a person a monster and what is humanity and sort of this fine line between human and animal and what is it and should we cross it, can we cross it. It's
like
almost
talking about cyborgs.
Yeah, or the island of Dr. Moreau. It's a little bit different when somebody can choose to turn into an animal. Usually the discussion textually is geared, at least in fic, less towards like what makes you a human or not, and more like, so you can turn into a really cool animal, like should you do that? And depending on the world that is created around it, whether it's accepted or not, I see a fair amount of it being used as sort of like and I'm going to put quotation marks around this because don't feel like we have the space here to discuss the term that I'm using, but fantasy racism, which is something that you should look up if you don't know what it is. It's a thing that exists, but I've seen a fair amount of fic where they're like, look, they're humans, they're werewolves, and we're going to discuss racism without talking about racism. And obviously, if you're talking about a trope where somebody is turned into an animal, you're not going to be discussing that as a society thing. And also, if it's sort of involuntary, it's a curse or something that's been inflicted upon them, that's the problem textually, is that you've been turned into an animal against your will. There's which is fun, and I have a lot of fic that I've read that are people getting turned into animals that I really enjoy. It's just not shiftery, it's not werewolfy, so maybe another time. So I feel like it's worth talking about some of the things that I like about this trip that I feel like it touches on in interesting ways. First of all, I just love the fact that when you read a shifter fic specifically. So what I mean by shifter fic, I mean it's an animal shapeshifter person and they don't necessarily have to turn into a wolf. So it's not werewolves per se. It doesn't necessarily follow the rules of werewolves, so it's sort of anything that is not specifically were creatures, which is broad, but an important distinction because werewolves have weirdly specific rules. So anytime that I encounter shifter fic, it's really obvious most of the time that unless there was a very clear canon relationship to another animal, most authors spend a lot of time trying to figure out what animal each of the characters that turn into animals should turn into. And I love it because
it's like Hogwarts AU figuring out what house.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
weirdly metatextual.
Totally.
Because it's like people are trying to figure out attributes, and that means that it has this interesting and kind of odd crossover with spirit animals or spirit guides or daemons, where it's a reflection of who they are as a person, even though it's also just a skill that they have. And it's kind of fun looking at how people use that within the fic to be like, and now they're an animal, and I'm like, ooh, is this because it's a moment of self-reflection, or is it a moment of denial of emotions? Both are good. Which also weirdly ends up getting kind of folded in with like a fursona sort of an idea, or even anything of that brand, like witchsonas, fursonas, things where people are reaching out and grabbing kind of a theme and giving themselves an aesthetic around it or an identity around it. And I'm like, this is actually kind of cool. The idea that you're folding in this idea into this character. And it can be insightful or it cannot be insightful. I've seen it go both ways. Some of it's just honestly all in good fun.
Totally.
The other trope that I feel like bears talking about in relation to it actually is more on the werewolf side of things. And we'll talk about this more in depth in future. So if you have no idea what we're talking about, maybe don't immediately look it up online unless you're really prepared for that. But it's Omegaverse or ABO,
Woo!
Alpha Beta Omega, and there are lots of good video essays and articles about where the Omegaverse trope came from. But way down deep in the beginning layers from whence it sprouted, there was definitely sort of some werewolf thought processes going around.
It's kind of like the child of a werewolf AU.
Yeah, or
a more complicated child.
Close relation of some flavor. Might have gotten some mitochondrial DNA from werewolves.
Oh yeah.
And because of that, there is some mixing of the tropes sometimes. I've seen a decent amount where they're like, okay, werewolves or were-creatures or shifters exist, and also it's Omegaverse, also fantasy racism in its myriad different
Teen
forms.
Wolf, I would say, is abound with that kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Almost every Teen Wolf fic, there are ABO, and then there's another class of people that are werewolf who also are ABO. It's fascinating.
It's layered. But even when it's not that blatantly sort of mixed together, there is some fantasy animal traits, because they're not real animal traits, that get sort of folded into behaviors, or the idea of being feral gets brought up in both tropes. So
yeah,
there's some cross-pollinating going on there,
stuff.
Which there's talking about.
Actually, I will say, like, the instincts that come from ABO and like the cycles, the heat cycles that these people experience because of their ABO status or whatever, reminds me a little bit of sex pollen.
Oh, absolutely.
Trope. Yeah, it's like a crossover. ABO is like a cross between a sex pollen trope and a werewolf trope. I think that's really interesting.
Much like Orpheus, it is a trope of many mothers.
Oh, yeah.
Having said all of that, I think it is now time to get into some actual examples. Specifically things that I have read and enjoyed and would love for other people to read. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is a Teen Wolf fic, and I sort of went a little bit sideways because obviously Teen Wolf is about werewolves, so there's a lot of werewolf stuff in there. So it is a massively common tag within the fandom, and there's a lot of werewolves and shifters and pretty much every flavor and type you can imagine exist in this fandom. So instead of doing any of that and actually talking about a fic with these werewolves in it, I'm actually going to talk about a fic where the token human character Styles is a shifter character, and I'm going to call him a shifter rather than a werewolf because he doesn't really follow werewolfy rules for the most part. The fic is called The Undisclosed by Talia Tai. Styles is a fox shifter, and he apparently in this fic has been for the whole of the series, and he just never told anybody because there was never a right time to be like, so I'm not actually the token human. And by the time you're in season 3 or whatever, he's like, it doesn't really matter at this point, does it? I might as well be the token human. And the plot revolves around him. There is a new kind of hunter that specifically is looking for these fox shifters because they're very, very rare, and he wants to hunt him down and make him a trophy, but the pack doesn't know that he's a shifter.
I have to ask, is it kind of like a kitsune?
No.
Because kitsunes are fox shifters, right?
Not within Teen Wolf canon. Within Japanese culture, that's a very complicated question.
Oh, okay. I'm semi-wrong, semi-right. Gotcha.
Yes. So he is not a kitsune, which also exists in canon in Teen Wolf. In the plot, he obviously knows that he's the shifter, and he's being hunted, and the pack is sort of going, they don't know that it's him, so they're like, it must be just some guy passing through, right? Do we help him? Do we put our necks on the line for this super elite hunter to sort of plow through us to get to this fox? Do we not? And so Styles is sort of going, do I tell them? Do I not tell them? Are they just gonna like toss me to this guy or not? And obviously they don't. But it's a fun little riff on the tropes where they are kind of going back and re-exploring the idea of being a were creature and having a secret identity around that. And so I thought it was a good, fun little compromise. So like, it's a fandom that's got a ton of weird creatures and shifters in it, and then also this one over here that's specifically about that in a different way.
That sounds really interesting. I love finding fic I haven't read yet in the Teen Wolf fandom, so I will be reading that later on.
So the next one I want to talk about is called The Art of Purr-suasion by M and Bea, and this one is an Avengers fic. It's really short. It's 7K, and it's a Winter Soldier fic, but it's set after Winter Soldier, and it's Bucky kind of coming in from the cold. And it's really, really adorable because Bucky is apparently a cat shifter, and Steve knows this, but nobody else knows this. And so he kind of comes in from the cold, and he shifts for the first time into an enormous, I don't think they specifically say what it is, but it's basically an enormous black cat. And he's just sort of hanging around with Steve and living with him. And it's really, really cute because Steve knows that he's a cat shifter and is just sort of comfortable with it and is like, okay, we can cuddle now because you obviously need cuddles now that you're a giant cat. And so they're just, chilling, snuggling on a couch, no feet apart because they're definitely gay. And then Steve is like, I guess I gotta go make dinner. So he just picks up this jaguar-sized cat and is just like, and I'm just gonna cook dinner the way, you would do with a house cat. And the other members of the team are like, so Barnes totally escaped into the vents and is apparently in your apartment, and we just wanted to make sure you were cool, and that's a really big cat. And Steve's like, hi friends, and they're all like, that's a really big cat, and he's like, yep, it's all good. Yep. It doesn't have a ton of plot, but it's super adorable, and if you need a little bit of a smile and like the idea of big cat Bucky, then definitely read it.
That's like pure fluff.
The very purest. So on the subject of cats and turning into them, another short little one that's a little bit different, because I've been talking about shifters, I've been talking about were creatures. I did throw in that I do kind of consider animagi in here, the same idea. And if you want to get into some serious meta that authors are like thinking really deeply about what a character should turn into, and also seeing like people getting into internet fist fights about what people should turn into, Harry Potter fandom is the place to be. But for another really cute fluffy little piece, there is it's a little one shot called The Black Cat of Good Fortune by Kitty Fic.
It's literally called Kitty Fic. The
author is literally Kitty Fic.
Hilarious.
So this one is an 8th year Harry Potter AU, which if you don't know what that is, we have an episode about that now. And in it, Harry and the gang are sort of doing their usual school shenanigans, but Draco's having a hard time being on the losing side of the war, and also having to go back to school, and also having no friends. And so Harry, in his infinite wisdom, decides that the only way to cheer him up is to go and try and be his friend, and the best way to be his friend is to show up as a little black cat, animagus form, and just be his buddy. And not tell him that it's an animagus. Again, it's just really cute and fluffy because eventually Draco figures it out, and Harry is very like, oh no, I've been discovered. And Draco's like, look, you've gone out of your way to be my friend for like a semester. I think we can just be friends now as humans too, if you'd like.
Yeah, why can't that just happen in like the actual books, in my opinion? But whatever.
There's nothing that says it couldn't. You just need to ignore the epilogue or assume subtext.
Very true.
So, my next couple are all in one form or another going to be about werewolves, except for the last one, which is debatable. So, the next one I want to talk about is another Avengers fic, and it's called Steve Rogers and the Wolf Dog. And this one is much longer. It's a wonderful story where Bucky is a werewolf who is basically just living as a wolf. And Nat and Sam decide that what Steve needs for Christmas is a dog. And so they go to the shelter and they bring him Bucky. And Steve has no idea how dogs work. He has never owned a pet.
Oh,
So
no.
when Bucky starts trying to do his usual shenanigans, in which usually gets him sent back to the pound for another while until somebody adopts him, Steve just sort of ends up adapting around it. Like, the dog can work the TV remote. Well, that's just a thing he can do. The dog knows how to do this thing. That's just a thing the dog can do. The dog refuses to lay on the floor and insists on being on the couch. Yeah, okay, I guess I'm just losing that fight.
Why do people love riding Bucky as an animal?
I don't know that they do. It might just be me finding like the few.
You just found two fics. What if those are the only two fics on AO3 where Bucky turns into an animal?
They're definitely not, but
okay.
I know that Steve Rogers and the Wolf Dog is one of the more popular ones for the good reason that I think it is very well written. It's actually part of a series, but I have only read the first one because I have limited time in my life to read all of the things I want to read. Unfortunately, the story itself functions really well, where you get the feeling that this werewolf Bucky has sort of the same sort of traumatic past that usual canon Bucky has, and that him being a wolf is sort of his version of being the Winter Soldier. So you get some of that really sweet, like, Steve going out of his way to try and, like, bring him back to being human, and it's a weirdly good metaphor in this story for something that is very literal. In this case, he's literally learning how to be human again.
That's really sweet. So he's actually learning how to be human, and then obviously Steve's like, oh shit, you're hot.
More like Steve, he doesn't know that he's a werewolf initially, so there's this wonderful big reveal moment that I'm not gonna spoil. And thereafter he's like, so you can still be my dog, but also, like, I'm gonna make you be a human person, even if you don't want to be. And also, like, we're gonna be friends now. And Bucky's like, I don't really wanna, and Steve is like, no, we're friends now, and also you're my favorite person because you're my dog and also my person, and you're my and he's like, okay, fine.
Wow. I mean, Steve Rogers is kind of the golden retriever of, I mean, that's what people think if you don't read fic, because he's really nuanced as a character, actually, if you read fic about Steve Rogers, but he is most like that. And I think it's funny that he would also, like, if he has a dog and then it also happens to be his favorite person, like, that's amazing for him. He loves dogs because he is one, kind of, anyway.
This one I would really, really recommend reading because it's one of my
favorites. How long is it?
30K.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not, like, I wouldn't call it long, but it's a nice, healthy chunk of story. And like I said, it's part of a series, so there's more to it than just this story. So, my next rec is, I am pretty sure I have cracked jokes about the idea of Hobbit werewolves, like Lord of the Rings but werewolves. In fact, I'm pretty sure that was my main example in our crack episode of what crack is. And so here I am to deliver on, it is definitely a crack premise, but it is not treated as crack, therefore it is serious. And it is a sweet little series called Wolf Songs by Birdkeeperklink. So it's 2 parts, and the first part is a retelling of The Hobbit, but where all of the dwarves and hobbits are werewolves. Well, all the elves are werewolves too, but they're not super important, so, like, that gets a single sentence mention. Oh, I guess all the men are too. Everybody but Gandalf. Gandalf is not a werewolf. It's sort of also a fix-it because they don't make anybody die at the end. The second part is this really heartwarming little one-shot sort of a deal where after the events of The Hobbit, they end up having Bilbo's nephew Frodo come and live with him, and he's just a little baby hobbit and a little baby werewolf, and the author has this little world building point where the way that dwarf wolves sing and hobbit wolves sing is different, and hobbit wolves don't sing for a while when they're kids until they sort of figure out how to do it, and dwarf wolves find this very anxiety inducing because baby dwarves just follow along and sing from the get-go. And so you have baby Frodo, who hasn't been singing with them at all, and then he finally sings and all the dwarves just lose their minds, and they're all wolves at the time, so they're like just bouncing around. It's really, really cute. If you need something that will make you smile a lot, this is a really good series for that. It's not very long.
I'm totally reading it. I haven't even seen the movies. I'm a terrible
You really
nerd.
don't need to.
Okay.
The last one is kind of my weirdest one because I'm breaking my own rules in this one, where I said I was not going to talk about people who were forced to turn into animals, but this one bridges the line. So it's called The Witcher Wolf by I'm Fairly Witty, and it's a series in which the first part of the series, Geralt gets turned into a wolf, he gets cursed, and the whole first little story is him meeting up with Yeskier, and Yeskier realizing that he's a wolf, sort of. He doesn't know this until the very end, and then he accidentally uncurses him, or fixes it, so he turns back into a human. But thereafter, they realize that he has the ability to turn into a wolf and then turn back into a human with some conditions whenever he wants. And so they end up sort of getting into some shenanigans, and the last part of the series is them deciding in their infinite wisdom that they have to go and get Cirilla, who is Geralt's child of surprise and has been living in her kingdom, and now it's time to go get her because there's an army about to march on the kingdom. But the queen hates Geralt's guts and would arrest him on sight. So their genius plan is they will sneak him in as a wolf, who, without the special conditions being met, can't turn back into a human. So he's stuck as a wolf, sneaking in to get his child's surprise that doesn't know about him. Well, there's an army marching, and also his bard is just there being supportive because they get separated and can't actually help each other. It's pretty much exactly what you would expect to happen to these two with this brilliant plan. Again, a wonderful thing that you could only do because you turned Geralt into a wolf.
Jaskier, his middle name and his last name is Supportive Bard.
Pretty much.
Jaskier Supportive Bard. That's it. Oh my god, I need to read that right now. That is so friggin' cute sounding and a little bit fun, but also just a tiny bit of angst, which I like. A little sprinkle of angst.
I will freely admit that although this is our Tropetober and it's all supposed to be spooky, I basically didn't pick any spooky ones because the idea of your favorite characters turning into fluffy animals was just, it's too much. I couldn't resist. I needed to show you all of my favorites.
I don't think I chose anything particularly spooky in my episodes either for this Tropetober, but I think we should try and change that for the next episode. Ooh,
yeah.
So exciting. All right. That was super fun listening to you talk about fun little furry animals that can turn back into humans. I'm going to read all of these now. Thank you.
So, if anybody has a fic where somebody turns into a chinchilla or strongly involves chinchillas, we also kind of want to hear about that now.
Please send it to mandbepresents@gmail.com. It'll be in the show notes. Holy crap, we need that in our lives. Apparently, we just love chinchillas, so we need that.
Exactly.
All right, I think we're done.
Yeah, so I guess we'll see you all next week on
Fangirls Anonymous. Bye!